Good afternoon. I'm John Nickus, and this is another episode of SCM Undercarriage. I'm here with Philip Richter from Turtle Garage and Lowell Paddock, formerly of General Motors, and now the head of the Lime Rock Concours. And this afternoon, we're going to talk about the C4 Corvette. Stigma or real sports car? What is the real verdict on this car? Lowell is an ex-GM guy. What do you think?
Well, I'm a big fan of the C4, and just finished writing a big section for a book that we're both working on. And one of the top Corvette collectors in the Northeast says it's really an underrated car, and I'd agree. I think it brings a lot of things to the table. It's got great styling, great performance, particularly in the later years, great handling. I'll come back to ride in a minute, and just terrific overall package, and it's very affordable. And so I think the C4's time is going to come. I think what really differentiates what's good value from what's probably a bit more problematic is which year you buy. The later years definitely, like all Corvettes, tend to get better, tend to get a little bit more sorted out, a little bit better built. And so when we look towards, the 95 and 96 cars, I still think they're very underrated for what they are. They're underpriced for what they are, and they're terrific sports cars. And we'll talk a little bit later about the ZR1s, but I think even the base normal cars, particularly in my case, my own taste, the convertible is just a terrific looking car. It's fun to drive, great performance, and you can walk out the door with an excellent example for less than $20,000 and probably even less than that.
Philip, let's talk about that for a second. And as sacrilegious as this sounds, is a Chevy Corvette, the C4 generation, America's answer to a Mazda Miata in that it's cheap and fun to drive and out there in the tens of thousands?
Yeah, I think that's fair, John. It's not, it's not as refined as a Miata in the sense of an engineering standpoint, but I think Lowell nailed it, right? It really depends on the year. I think as you move away from the 80s and into the, early mid 90s, that car underwent a metamorphosis during its 11-year production run. Actually 12 years. They started building in 83, but anyway, I think that's fair. Yeah, I'd buy that.
Is this, Lowell, because you probably have more experience than the other, the rest of us, is this a fun to drive car? And I know, Philip, we've talked about this as, you don't think it is, and certainly base trim, but for those of us that grew up with other things, having a V8, no matter how underpowered relative to, other things in the range, is a lot of fun. Isn't that right, Lowell?
Yeah, I think the trouble with the issue about the early cars is that Dave McCloud and the team, I would say in retrospect, they kind of overcorrected on the up-level suspension, the Z51, and even to a certain extent the Z52, which was developed to address the Z51, was really a track-level suspension, and it's very punishing. And over time, they came up with various ways to get around that, and probably the best way to get around it was the FX3 adjustable suspension that was developed initially for the ZR1, but then later became available on the regular car. And I'd even say, I disagree with Philip a little bit. I think the base tune on a base, 95, 96 Corvette convertible is still a blast to drive. If you want to have something that's really track ready and you're going to really drive it hard in the weekend, yeah, then you can either get the up-level suspension or turn the FX3 up all the way. But I don't think at least that's not what I'm looking for. I think the regular car is still a heck of a lot of fun to drive. And when you look at some of the up-level engines, and we'll come back, I know we'll come to the ZR1 in a minute, but as the car went along, and dug out of sort of the performance pit of the mid-80s, even the base engine had plenty of performance. And you get then to the Grand Sport, which is a limited edition, and I don't particularly like the appearance of the Grand Sport, but from a performance perspective, it was nearly all the way to the ZR1, and it was a regular Corvette. So I think you've got a tremendous, you've got 360,000 cars built. So within that span of time and that span of models, you've got tons to choose from to really suit your taste.
Lowell,
So Philip, is one out there for you?
Say again?
This is Philip. Is there a car out there that speaks to you?
Well, there is in the C4 range for sure. But before we get there, I just want to ask Lowell a question, because in our pre-prep here for the C4 live cast here, you had a really scientific term that described the ride of the earlier C4s. Could you share that with our viewers?
Yeah, I called it ass breaking. And when you go
Ass
back and
cracking.
read the early
I think it was ass cracking.
ass cracking, ass breaking. Well, the crack
He said
usually
ass
leads to the
cracking,
break. So
actually.
maybe the crack isn't the right word, but it was really punishing. And when you go back and read the original road and track road tests, you see that even enthusiasts, even people that love to drive fast cars at Willow Springs said, gosh, this is really kind of stiff. And I think that's why Chevy backed off on that. And that's why I think the later cars, they got a better sense of what to do and how to tune it properly. And then the FX3 kind of resolved the problem entirely. So,
Yeah.
but I think when you look at the technology that the team put into the car, I mean, they were really serious about what they were doing. Between the way they packaged the car, the way they designed the suspension, Goodyear developed a whole set of tires just for the Corvette. It was a tremendous amount of engineering, and that's why I think it's so much value, is that so much enthusiasm and so much technology, in its day went into this car that for $15,000 for a very nice used car, it's going to be a tremendous amount of fun.
So get back to your point,
John, to
Philip.
your point, look, I was 20 in 1990. And when the ZR1 came out in the late 89, I mean, that car was like literally came from Pluto. No, I wasn't expecting it. The original C4 was a great looking car, but it was sort of emaciated. It didn't have a ton of power. And then they built this thing, which I think what Car and Driver called it, the King of the Hill, or Corvette from Hell, or
The Corvette from Hell.
Hell. I mean, it really was. And the cool thing is, I love little nuanced details about special editions of cars. It had square taillights the first year, 90, right? It didn't have the rounded ones of the regular C4, and it had a slightly wider flared rear end. Now that changed, I think, in 91 and forward, all of the Corvettes had that, even the base models. But in 90, and I could be corrected, but I think 90, it was strictly the ZR1 had that little badge that said ZR1. It had the valet key to get to half power.
And the valet key.
That was that car, and so many of them have been saved, which you can buy them all day long with literally either delivery miles or under 5,000 miles. They're out there, red with red interior, red with tan interior. For me, John, 1990 ZR1, even though the 95 is a better car, for sure, everyone will tell you that, 90 is the car for me, because that's when it hit the road. And everybody my age wanted that car.
So Lowell, you actually have some experience, obviously, with this model from a professional sense. You were an executive at General Motors. I think you did a Corvette book. Would you ever buy one?
Yes, I'm seriously looking at one. I might not necessarily get my spouse to ride along with me in it, but I think there are terrific cars out there, and every time I see a convertible, I think, gosh, I remember it very fondly. And I remember it when I borrowed one from a fellow GM employee, and on my first or second date with my wife, and managed to crash it twice. So I have particularly indelible memories of that. But I can tell you, it's a very durable car. So,
by the way, everybody that's watching this is making a note to never lend a car to Lowell Paddock.
No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that if I were you. And the trouble is, the backstory is that at GM, when you're assigned a car, you don't usually, if you have a problem with that car, you don't get that car back. So my coworker was particularly upset with me that she didn't get her anniversary edition Corvette back for the rest of the summer. But yeah, I would seriously, I mean, Philip and I have talked about this. I can't decide if I want a ZR1 because it's an extraordinary footnote in Corvette history, or if I want a convertible because I love the styling of it.
Well, Lowell, why don't you get to the point about, you're not sure whether you can get your spouse to ride in the car, because as I understand it, she is so anti-Corvette that she won't even be seen in them. What about that stigma that sometimes attaches to Corvettes and Corvette owners?
I don't know, John. I think a part of it is just, it's always this sort of wanting, and I think the ZR1 was an example of, like, we're going to kill the Europeans. We're finally going to go after them and nail them. And on paper, they did. There's no question that the ZR1 had, it had so much bespoke engineering, the tires, the chassis, the engine, the FX3 suspension that only the 959, I think, had at that point. But it still had this, American flavor about it that it just, and I think Road and Track's a bad example because, they were typically less than thrilled with most American cars, but it just didn't quite elevate itself up to the same level as the contemporary European performance cars, even though on paper it had all the chops to do so. So, yeah, I mean, I think she'll probably come around, but my father had a '66 Stingray. I grew up with Corvettes. I've written lots of books about Corvettes. I still think they're fantastic cars, despite what my spouse might think.
So, Philip, you're one of the most highfalutin guys I know. I can't believe I just used that in
What
a
does that
sentence.
mean?
Um,
Highfalutin.
Look, Daddy Warbucks, I'm sure you can figure it out.
I don't have chains, so I might, there is a stigma to I think the early Corvettes from the C4 era. Maybe chains, wife beater, driving with the T-top off, playing the Bon Jovi, that kind of thing. But I think the later cars blew past that and became really world-class cars. I really think that.
Philip, are these investment grade collectibles to you?
It's funny. I went on a tour of the Heritage Collection, the GM Heritage Collection up in Michigan, I think it's Highland Park. And the curator, I asked him, I said, why are ZR1s, stuck in the doldrums there? And he just said, they're poised to go. They're great cars. They're like Lowell said, they're kind of the crown jewel of Corvette history. I mean, they certainly deserve a place in the history books. He didn't have a good answer for me either. I don't know. I think, if it were me, I'd buy a 5 or 10,000 mile ZR1 for a bargain and drive it as much as you wanted to and enjoy it. And I kind of think you get the convertible with the T-top effect pretty close, but I get what Lowell's saying. I mean, they do look cool in a convertible. I remember 1986 when their first Corvette convertible came out.
Yep.
It was stunning. And
Yeah,
great with the top
absolutely.
down, less so with the top up, but still a great convertible.
Yep.
I would just get the ZR1 and forget it because you're getting the Lotus design, the Mercury marine history, like you're getting all this extra suspension. I mean, they went to the moon with that car.
And Philip, remember that they did all this testing at Ford Stockton where they said they really were out to say, trust us, this is really a reliable engine. And they set a whole bunch of endurance records at Ford Stockton with the ZR1. I think they've since been eclipsed by other cars, but I think the one thing that the guy I spoke to in the Corvette Center said, look, these are very reliable cars. Yes, over time they have issues and they're complicated because, for example, the starter motor is buried down inside the V of the engine. So if you've got a starter problem, you've got a lot of work to take it out and seals and things break. But the fundamentals of the engine are very, very reliable, and as is the rest of the car. So I think when you think about that level of performance versus, say, the equivalent Ferrari, the equivalent, Maserati, equivalent whatever, you're certainly getting a more reliable, probably more robust product, I think, in a ZR1 than the competition.
Well, guys, thank you so much for this SCM undercarriage analysis of the C4 Corvette. It looks like, depending on the variant selected, there is some investment grade potential in them. And if you still want to, as Philip Richter says, walk around with your gold change and wife beater, I guess that's a possibility too. By the way, that's Philip 1L Richter. Send his address if you'd like to send some comments. This is SCM's Undercarriage, and thank you for being here, guys.